beware of. Don't try to avoid massively stretching one dimension relative to all of the others, unless you can break up the standing waves with some shelves or bracing or whatnot that you can also use. Dual purposes are always good. You know, like the bracing it can be quite effective for that. Remember that a driver takes up volume. That's taking all about half a litre, something like that. The vent will also take up some volume in your box. Those are not accounted for when you design your nice pretty alignments. So if you can, account for the sort of approximate volume. You don't need to be too anal about it, but do remember to factor in the volume taken up by the driver, bracing and the port, which are all extras to the volume that you've come out with. Okay, so that's those are factors to remember as well. And also, as I mentioned before, I'll say it for about the third time, the room response in most spaces dominates below roughly 300 Hz. Roughly. It's not always that, obviously, but as a rule of thumb, it's a good basic guide. So your minor differences in responses might not be particularly significant in practice. Now we're talking minor differences here. You've got to use some common sense basically with it. Drive unit, quality control, as Mark will say, and the variations that you've got plus or minus 20% for God's sake, you know, will also tend to mask certain little effects like that. So again, remember, it's better to account for things like that in the design process, but don't get too panicky about them. It's just a sort of general guide. And otherwise, a few conclusions from me and my kangaroo friend here. Yeah, as per usual, it's in speaker design, system design, cabinet design, as with anything else, everything in moderation, basically. Don't try focusing on areas to excess at the expense of others. Especially if those others might actually be quite important. Extremes are often impractical. You're losing too much. So it's not worth doing. Commercial manufacturers tend to have, when they're designing a sort of reflex box or whatever, they tend to have to create an average. They can't tune it for every single room, unless they're one of these lads that charges $250,000 for a set of speakers, and they go in and they measure your room and everything else for that matter. Yeah, of course. Yes, we'll quite happily, if anybody wants us to do it, yeah, we'll have the full Swarovski crystals using for dispersion effect hanging over. And there is a company in Germany that does exactly that, incidentally. $250,000 I think those things cost, and they do have a Swarovski crystal that they have specially cut hanging over an upward firing supertweeter.
Oh, see that.
Yeah, it's great. I actually quite like that. That's the thing. Good on you, lads. I don't think they've sold any, astoundingly enough. But not many people can afford to drop that amount of money on a set of speakers, but they probably sound very good. I don't think it's got a particular relation to the fact that it's got a Swarovski crystal as dispersing things, but you know. But yeah, the commercial boys, people like Mark and myself, basically, with Mark Audio sales to the commercial side of it, we have to, a lot of what you saw there and the sort of lightly damped alignments is this kind of thing that we have to aim for anyway, because we can't tune it individually for every single person's house, so it's just not realistic. So, and it does work, compromising on that. It's like anything, it's about selecting your compromises and using a degree of balance in them, which is largely what this sort of hour of me waffling has been about. As DIYers, you've got greater flexibility than us in the commercial world in many senses, but keep a clear eye on your performance skills and the system and the context in which they'll be used, because that will make you a better designer and have more successful, enjoyable loudspeakers than any amount of pretty mathematics that you get. Mathematics and science have their place. They are tools, but they shouldn't dominate you. because we don't live in a perfect mathematical world. That's all I think I'll waffle about today. If anybody wants to discuss, shall we say, slightly more exotic alignments, if we have time later, then please do. Otherwise, give me a squawk. Give me a squawk, and no doubt Mark and I will be along at some point in the future again. So, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks very much.